me that I should hit record. That was her job from earlier. So thank you all again for joining us here. I'm acting as kind of moderator and also as Zoom host. So if you have any Zoom issues or need any help, you can ask in the chat, but also feel free to use the chat to ask any questions, or feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself to chime in. And I'm going to let each of our panelists kind of go around and introduce themselves. Maybe if we start with Autumn, since you were first alphabetically by first name.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Autumn Ewan. I work at NC State University, where I am an instructor, and I do evaluation work with our 4-H team. And I have the great honor of being a coach of 9 different sites for SciFar. So.
Boyd, do you want to go next?
Yes, I assumed I would be going next since you said alphabetical order. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Boyd Owens. I work with South Carolina State University's 1890 Extension Program, where I'm the Upstate Region Director. I'm responsible for programming in Anderson, Greenville, Pickens, and Spartanburg counties. And I have a SciFar project with Clemson University, where we provide STEM activities in after school and summer settings.
Carolyn, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Gunther. I'm from Ohio State University. I'm an associate professor there in human nutrition. And I also have an appointment in extension. And my team has a current SciFar grant. We just wrapped up year 3 of 5. And we're focused on scaling up a family meals program in the Head Start setting. So thanks for the chance to be here today, and good to see everyone.
And last but not least, Mark.
Hello, I'm Mark Small. I'm a professor of psychology and director of the Institute on Family and Neighborhood Life. Relevant today, I've had a previous SciFar project, and I'm currently have a joint project with Boyd Owens from South Carolina State, doing after-school programming in sites across South Carolina in STEM.
Awesome. Thank you all again for joining us. We really appreciate it. And I know some of our attendees are folks who just found out that they've been recommended for funding, and other folks who might be thinking about if they applied for funding again with a new project, what could be some of the tasks that they have for their first year of their grant, their planning year. And so thinking about that first year, I think one of the first questions that we thought about having the panel answer is kind of what were the most time-consuming tasks that you had in your first year? And did you have any lessons learned once those were completed? Sometimes the lesson learned can be, I wish we'd started that earlier, but any lessons learned from those time-consuming things you need to do?
I guess I can.
Oh, sorry, Boyd.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Okay.
You beat me to the punch.
By a millisecond. Yeah, I would say one of the most time-consuming things in year 1 was getting our team organized and getting all of our team meetings set up and on the calendar. And so that includes, a regular weekly or biweekly meeting of my own research team. That includes joint meetings of my team with our community partner and their team. That includes a once monthly meeting with the investigators on the grant. And then also it includes quarterly meetings with the stakeholders. And it was kind of a pain. I mean, it was a bit of a headache and a lot of work to get all of those meetings arranged. But, and kind of overwhelming too, to look at the year and years ahead and, all of the time that will be committed in those meetings. But it was 100% worth it. It is the way that we've learned kind of keeps us all connected and moving forward. So.
I can piggyback off of that. this is my first, I would guess you would say, quote unquote, big grant. So some of the things that I would say that consumed the majority of my time was getting all of the documentation organized for my institution, and getting those documents to play well with a partner institution. But I guess we can talk about that later. And when I say documents, I mean sub-awards that our institution is going to give to some of our site partners, staff hired, and those documents that need to be taken care of with that. What else do I have? Getting the sites organized, getting those MOAs. One thing that will happen, you have your grant funded, and boom, the site that you planned on working with is not available to work with you anymore. So what will you do? That happened to me. I had two sites at two different schools in the same school district. That means it would be just one check to one institution, well, one place, one MOA, 11111, and that changed to 2. So just keep that in mind of all of the paperwork that goes with along with getting your sites up and running. Outside of your monthly staff meetings with staff and making sure everyone is where they need to be, we ended up adding a couple of agents, 4-H agents, to come in because we have a STEM curricula. So we were able to get them to come in and do some fill-in due to some staffing issues we had early. So it's a couple of things to think about in year 1. The paperwork, making sure everything plays well together. And just take some time to manage your grant in that first year. Try to do some forecasting, see how money's being spent, where's the lag, and if need be, what can I do to make up the lag of that of spending?
Let me add to that, since my partner in crime there, it's some of the points about the first year planning and lessons learned. I think this is my first joint project, and so for me it was a little bit different than I'm used to in terms of collaborating. And so personally, I had to learn to collaborate rather than to take more of a leadership role, I would say, in order to get everybody, give everybody a voice in how this is done. There are differences in how Clemson does things and how South Carolina State does things. And I think that's true of any two institutions that are working together. I think it's important to try and understand what those differences are with your partner first before you start trying to bring in administrators to talk to one another. I know that some joint programs, it's really joint on paper, but it's not really joint in terms of practice. For us, it really is joint. We all visit all the sites. We all work together. So for me, it was a little bit more time consuming than perhaps I thought initially to get to all the sites and to talk to all the people, make sure everybody has some kind of common understanding of what it means to be SciFar and what it means to be part of a SciFar project. And that acculturation takes place on everybody's part. I mean, everybody who is part of any of our sites kind of was part of that process. So that's something I didn't anticipate really. I probably should have thought of going into the first year, but those are some lessons learned.
Yeah, I'll add to that. Definitely paperwork, planning sessions. I'm in my 3rd SciFar grant. We're finishing up the 5th year. And hiring took a lot of time for us. And honestly, it should have probably taken more, because it's really important to make sure you have that right team in place. It created some issues for us when we didn't have team members in place the way that we should up front. Organizing, partnership building, the kind of site-specific program development that you have to do, developing protocols and making sure everything is sound, and all of the documentation that goes along with that, so that you're making sure that all of your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed before you get into programming. Really thinking intentionally evaluator, really thinking intentionally about evaluation and making sure that we had that in place. All of the IRB stuff that goes along with that. There's so much organization and paperwork and planning that goes into all of that.
I'm glad you mentioned IRB, Autumn, because that's one thing that we've heard before in our consultations with first year grants, sometimes not realizing, especially if you're needing to go through not only your institution's IRB, but if a school district or a tribal institution that you're working with has an IRB, then you've got double the time to go through both yours and theirs to get approval. So yeah, that
let me just add something on the IRB.
Mm-hmm.
The data collection for IRB requires at Clemson and in South Carolina State that anybody who's collecting the data be certified. And so it's important to think through who's collecting the data, what purpose, so that you don't overly burden a lot of people with having to go through that. We use city training. I think that's a common one that a lot of people use, a lot of universities use to train on IRB. So to think through logistically, who really needs to be part of that and who doesn't, so that it's just a more efficient use of your thinking.
I'd like to add to what Mark said. And so my team, my broader research team, does community-based work around childhood obesity, and we've been doing it for over 12 years. But with the SciFAR project, it's the first time that we invited actually a couple of the members from the community to be on the IRB application and to go through that training. And so that was a new idea for us, and really it has been a winning idea. So we at least have, we have one or two people, at the site who is on our IRB application, who's gone through that training and can kind of, help assist with recruiting. I mean, the message that we send to our community partners is that when it comes to the evaluation, the onus is on us, on the university, on the team of academicians, but we do partner on that, and it has been wonderful. And it also, for our community members, I think they have seen it as a win because they get this extra certification. They develop these skills in conducting research with human subjects. And so, I totally agree with what Mark was saying in that regard.
Awesome. So I'm going to piggyback on something else you said earlier, Carolyn. You were talking about meetings and those kinds of logistics being a time-consuming part of the first year. And for you, Carolyn, and also for others, were there any other tools or things you set up to get your project going in terms of logistics, like a shared timeline or task list? Sometimes folks will use Trello or OneNote board, any of those kinds of tools or tricks.
We have, and this kind of tags on to what Autumn was saying about hiring and getting the right staff in place. I mean, that's another big part of the first year. But along those lines, we have used different management tools depending on who's on the project. So for example, we're currently using a Microsoft management tool to keep us organized, but in the past we've done Google. So we've used a variety of different things. It kind of just depends on who's in that project management role and what they prefer using. But I do highly recommend some kind of team organizational tool to keep everybody on track. My own team, for the evaluation, for the research, for the data collection, we have a very robust shared calendar of when data collection is happening and who's collecting those data, and so hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, for us, and maybe it's because I'm old or old-fashioned, or because I live in South Carolina, it's important to make these personal connections during the first year. So we spend a lot of time in person with one another, sort of building up relationships. And I think that's for the first year in particular, I think that's important to kind of get that trust and familiarity with everybody's style and how they think and how they talk and how they communicate. before you move to choosing which of the 75,000 different ways in which you can connect anymore are available, because some are used to Google, some are used to Microsoft. You know, there's just a lot out there. So my suggestion would be to build up these relationships however most efficiently you can do that, and then go from there in terms of deciding on what might be a useful tool for the group.
For us, we started with a whiteboard. I'm just gonna be honest, because 5 years ago things were different than things are today. But our university loves for us to use Google Things, so we do that. They have some really cool new tools now where they have like Jamboards and all of the places that you can help with running team meetings in that space. I do have team members who love Trello and use it religiously, especially for those very task-oriented, task-specific things that people have to do. But I think most of ours is, like Carolyn was saying, in Google Calendar. We have a pretty extensive calendar set up so everybody knows when everything is supposed to happen. And just keeping everything in a shared Google file. They have the new setting. It's not the shared with me setting, but it's like shared folders that you can use in Google, and that really helps us to keep things straight. Things were getting lost in the shared with me pile, honestly, before they came out with that shared folder setup. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of what Autumn was speaking on. We actually used a template for what Autumn is using in North Carolina for our annual report. And it was a Google Doc. And it's very simple and it's easy to use in Word, but primarily at our institution, we use Microsoft Teams and their whole Teams platform, which has SharePoint, forms, and all kind of OneNote, which we don't really use a lot, but different platforms that you can use to share and collaborate on getting tasks completed. But with Clemson and SC State, we are primarily, we're kind of new, but we do a lot of old things too. So we will get on a conference call, and a lot of people don't talk about that now. We'll get on a conference call and then plan a Zoom meeting that way. And then before we get off the call, we'll plan our next team meeting. So although new platforms work well, the old ones work just as well too. So just do what's best for you and in your situation. But the key is to make sure you're communicating amongst everyone on your team so everybody knows what's going on.
And Ali, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, and this is very helpful as we start in this grant, and we're thinking. I think we're still. My name is Ali Hurtado. I'm at the University of Maryland, and my partner in crime, Alex Chan, is also in this conversation. So we're just we're in the midst. It looks like we're sort of in the midst of formalizing things. So we're basically in recommended for funding. But our community partners are very excited about it, and they want to just keep going. And so we're trying to kind of balance expectations. And I have two questions for you. It looks like finding the key staff members in the team are key. And aside of a core team, we have budgeted for a program coordinator. A little bit of time for the planning year, and then a little bit more time for during the actual implementation years. And I'm just thinking through some of the capacities and skills of this program coordinator, and because I'm finding myself a little bit in the trying to balance someone who knows the university system, the accounting, the planning, the how the university works, or someone who actually is in the community and has really good rapport in the community and has partnerships in the community. I do too, but I think if a person who's a little bit more has those skills to engage community partners, or a little bit more of the organization, and knows the system, the university system well, to be able to connect and plan. I wonder if you have any recommendations leaning towards what ideally I want someone who has both and has multiple skills, but if you had to choose one, what might be beneficial for this type of grant?
I mean, I'm so glad you asked that. We've had we also have a program coordinator built into our budget, and I see them as sort of, one of their roles or responsibilities is to be the liaison between, the university team and the community team. And that does take a special person. It's difficult to find. And I think it also depends on where you are, and so for example, at Ohio State, we have a huge student body. So, and so I've hired, for the two people that we've had, they've been past students who have worked in my group and wanting, just a regular job after graduating, and they've both been fantastic. It is, it's a big position, and it's like the first person that I had in that role was hugely competent, and so was the next person, but their styles were so different, and they saw different things, and I had to modify my approach as the PI around that a little bit. So it's a big thing. I totally agree.
I can speak to my thoughts on it. If you're asking, I've got two people, one's super tied to the university, understands and can get everything done very efficiently and has all the connections to make it happen, and somebody else who's super tied to the community and is respected and can make everything happen there, and you have one choice like Solomon to choose, I would go with the community person, because that's the long-term sustainability play. And people can learn the university system. Yeah, it's a pain in the ass, and it's going to take time, and there's going to be mistakes, and people are going to yell at you for not filling out the right forms in the right way and all of that. But the long-term health of the program really, I think, is dependent upon the community person. In terms of a bridge between those two, like Carolyn's strategy, we have a graduate student, Venera, who might even be on this, I can't see everybody's name, who I think encapsulates a very unique set of skills where she's can talk community and relate well in terms of understanding that context, as well as being a graduate student, so she understands the bureaucracy that is Clemson. So she's been very instrumental for us in being able to help sort of navigate that. So that's a hybrid position, somebody who's has two parents with superpowers, and she's got a little bit of both of them rather than individual ones. But anyway, that's my thoughts.
Just to tag on to what Mark said, sorry, I'll be very brief, but it is absolutely critical to have, a main person at the site, which we do. And if we didn't, we actually have several main people at the site, but one in particular, and that is imperative. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, Boyd.
No, you're fine. And excuse me for drinking, but for some reason, I got a little itchy throat. And it would happen at 2 o'clock when we start. So, yeah, I would agree with Mark. I would get someone in the community who has those community ties, because at the end of the day, if you get someone with those ties, and then you have a policy where they could come to you with issues around the institution, you could then serve as a guide and teach them how to navigate the institution. Because we all know our schools, and we all know the pitfalls and what's hard and what's easy to do. So that would be the route I would go. Get someone who has those ties in the community, because you just never know in the community. You may need something, and you may not necessarily be working in that community, So you're going to need an ally in that community, and that person could be that for you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for that question, Ellie. If anyone else has questions, I do want to make sure we open it up if the initial conversation has sparked anything, or you came into this with a burning question you wanted to ask.
Hi, this is Shannon. I'm gonna thank you all for sharing your experience and expertise. I keep learning from my colleagues, and I love having the note taker in the background. That's something I need to pay attention to for future groups myself. I wonder if some of you could just offer examples about the ways that you show up and you spend that informal time. I heard that yesterday. I know I need to do more of it. I tend to be super task oriented and want to get right down to business. And that's just not the way to go all of the time. So examples, how do you get yourself in your community? How do your team members get in the community, especially in that year one period where you know you need their input and you need them to identify as being the right people to be at your table, or they need to introduce you to somebody else? Thanks.
I think, Shannon, one thing that we've done that's been really successful is, so we have a team meeting of the Ohio State folks and then our community partner, and we go to them. We go to their site, their building, and have the meeting typically around, the lunch hour, and either through grant funds or discretionary funds, we supply lunch. And so, at pre-pandemic, of course, I mean, we were very intentional about going to them for anything. And then I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that we did pretty much the same thing, Carolyn. We were really intentional about meeting with our school principals and the superintendents in the spaces that we wanted to be a part of our SIFAR project, even before we had the SIFAR project. And then following that up by going into those different counties that we serve. We have 2 North Carolina and 2 South Carolina sites in my current grant that's closing out, and really just being at the school, making sure that we are at the trainings when we invite all the teachers from the schools. And it is a pain. I'm with you on task orientation. Like, I want to just get the stuff done, and I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and please make that happen. And I've had to have a little bit of a brain twist to stop myself and make myself go out into those spaces and to be more engaged with my sites.
Yeah, I'll jump into just some informal. You were looking for informal ideas to get engaged in the community. Speak to an extension agent that works in that community, and try to get an idea of some of the leadership meetings that take place, and just try to go to one. Like, say for instance, if they have a PTA at a school, but the PTA is not big, but they have a parenting meeting night, and that's where a lot of people are. Someone like an extension agent or a regional director would probably know that, and they could send you those directions, and then just go and listen in and provide input. And really, it's just shaking hands and speaking. I know a lot of time, yeah, I would like to frame it as, although you're not getting a sign-in sheet or a pre and post test, but you're making those connections. And what worked for me, and this is outside of SIFAR, but worked for me when I came into a new region, is I would just find community meetings and attend them. And it's all about relationship. It's just all about relationship and figuring out ways you can grow relationships. And when I first started, I had an after-school program at a middle school that then the principal liked it so much so that he was able to patch me into their weekly meetings on the district level, and then I was able, and it just leads into bigger things. So just be very intentional about your non-intentional interactions, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, and I hear you talking a lot about the staff and the administrators, and we're finishing a project working where we rely on parents for input, and we're making decisions about programming with data, and there's just this feeling that the parents we're getting to respond may not be the parents we are most interested in reaching. And so part of it is, do I need to be present with parents? Do I need to make sure, you were talking earlier about hiring, that I've hired the right person who will be that contact with the parents? And then I guess I hear you saying as well that if you're talking to enough of the teachers, they talk to the parents, and that's another way to connect with them. So I need to be intentional in my non-intentional contact. Yeah.
And I would suggest maybe setting up a focus group meeting at that school, you know, if that's possible.
Do you get people to show up? Because we had a darn hard time getting those parents of little kids to show up.
That can be a challenge.
Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge across the nation.
Mm-hmm.
But
keep trying,
again,
is what I hear.
Yeah, I would try. Even if it's a survey that they could fill out on their cell phone, that won't take but, 2 or 3 minutes.
We've done that as well in the pandemic, is connecting through text, survey through text. So
I'll just add one thing, Shannon. And since coming to South Carolina 20 years ago, my style of communication has changed drastically. I was much like you, coming in, very task oriented, very specific, ABC, let's get it done kind of thing. And I learned very quickly that that's a straight route to failure in the South. So little things I did was, when I have meetings and set agendas, I always have breaks that are long, like 15-minute long, because that's where really all the work takes place in terms of creating the relationships and all the sidebar conversations and everything else. 20 years ago, if you just said, Mark, you got a 4-hour meeting and you're only meeting 2 hours, I would have, cringed at that. But now I'm thinking, yeah, maybe we'll get a lot done. So it's little things like that, being sensitive to the culture and how, I don't know where you're at, Shannon, but I know in the South, there's a particular way of doing things that's more conducive to getting things done than in other parts of the country. So being sensitive to the local culture and having some ambassadors of the local culture with you to help guide you, I think might help you change in terms of your style of learning how to do informal things in somewhat formal ways.
I always invite my sites to use me as an excuse, because your coaches are supposed to visit in year 1 and year 3. So if in year 1, your coach can help you have a reason to go and meet with people or meet with your sites, I think that's a really good use of a coach. I don't know if any of the rest of them are on here and would agree with me or not, but I'm all about being that, like, what is it, carrot and stick? I'm all about it. Like, just use me to make sure that connection is happening if that's a need. So.
Thanks, Shannon, so much for that question. One thing I wanted to ask Mark and Boyd, as joint grantees, I know that of the grants that have been recommended for funding, 2/3 of them are joint grants. So I know that that's a consideration for a lot of folks who are coming in. So what might be some special considerations or extra hurdles or tasks that you need to complete as joint grantees in year 1? I know, Boyd, you hinted at some with paperwork and institutions talking to one another.
Yes. I would suggest getting your finance offices and Office of Sponsored Programs together. And in that first year, before anything is done, and have them meet so they can know how each institution's offices work. This is just a simple one. At state, before we can travel, we have to do a pre-travel document. And We had to have that pre-travel document in 14 days before we do any travel. At Clemson, and as it relates to youth, they could do it at the back end. If we do it at the back end, it is all the way to the president to get whatever it was paid. So just things like that, you know, where institutions differ. Some schools will allow one big invoice to cover funding. Some schools you have to invoice monthly, like us. So just getting those offices together so they can meet, and then they can come up with a plan on how you can get the money flowing appropriately. That would be my first big suggestion to do. Mark?
Yeah, I concur. I think preliminary to that is for the PI and the co-PIs to have an understanding of the budget and how, if it's a first-time SciFAR grant, what that means in terms of how federal funding works. Because I think there's some misperceptions about federal funding, and even the questions earlier today about carryover and no cost extinctions. Thinking about those questions, or at least knowing what all the rules are, and making sure that that everybody's on the same page, not only the PI and co-PI, but also in terms of the institutions, in terms of their understanding of the rules, and then how they process and interpret the rules themselves. That would be the biggest lesson, I think, for incoming joint programs whose universities have not worked together on projects like this.
Right.
I want to open up and see if anyone, oh, Boyd, did you have something? Okay. I want to see if anybody in the audience or attendees, if you have any questions.
I will say it's doable, and once we got on our feet, it's been relatively smooth sailing, but it would have been nice to know what I know now in year one. So it would have been smooth sailing throughout, but you know, that's just the way it is sometimes.
I think one thing that we did in our first year, which I'm glad we did, it felt like uncomfortable in the moment, but we started piloting fairly quickly. So that kind of forced us into relationship with each other, meaning the university and our community partner. And, you know, basically just gave us an opportunity to work out a lot of the kinks, you know, as far as when we're, like, what exact time of day we're offering the program and how we're going to situate people in the building, and you know, and what's the best way of collecting forms, you know, the evaluation forms. So, and we did the piloting, you know, the program that we run is a weekly program, and it runs over a course of 8 or 9 weeks. So for the first year, what we did was a once monthly pilot of the program. And so it gave us plenty of time between programming to kind of decompress, you know, process the process outcomes, make tweaks, and move forward. So I'm glad that we decided to do that. I think in the end it was a good idea, even though it was uncomfortable. It would have been nicer to just wait to launch programming until year 2.
I love that, Carolyn. I really think a pilot is a really wonderful way to work on year 1. And like you said, you can think about what are some sticking points, and then also seeing kind of the levels of support you need to provide in year 1, and is that sustainable as you kind of expand from the pilot, or do you need to change something at a more basic level with training, or even just the scope or expectations? Yeah. Shannon, I saw you had your hand raised.
This gets a little bit past year 1, but a comment was made probably in the new grantee meeting on Tuesday about some of the reporting. And I've been managing the reporting on my projects the last 10 years. I wonder if anybody on this call has had somebody besides a PD or a co-PD enter information relevant to the site in their reports and annual reports? Or do they get it to you or one of your employees and they upload it?
Well, I know with our partnership, we have an evaluator, and they're responsible for getting the pre and post test data together, and then they will request information from us on each site, and then they will pull that information together. But it's a dedicated person on our project that does that.
Yeah, our team works together on the whole Google Doc thing to put the whole report together, and then it is uploaded by the PI. So
I just want to emphasize Autumn's Google Doc if you'd like a copy of it. I know she is sharing it, but folks have really raved about it in this year's annual report as a really great way to organize and work together, especially as teams, individual teams are remote. It's been a good way to collaborate and share the burden of that annual report piece.
I love simple tools. We don't share them enough. I love simple tools.
I know one thing I can see from my side, Shannon, of looking at CIFAR Suite and in the annual report, we know that folks have different ways that they approach it. So sometimes it is the PD or the co-PD who does the data entry. Sometimes, like you mentioned, Boyd, that's part of the evaluator's job, is their reporting as part of their tasks. And so they're tasked with annual report. I've also seen folks have each community site do their community report, and then the PD will kind of aggregate that up. So you can ask each person to do their community site, and then you can figure out, all right, if there were 50 folks here, 50 folks there, we've got 100, and I can enter that information. So, and there's lots of different approaches, and which one takes the least work, I'm not sure, but options.
I think I was just going through my list of lessons learned from year one. And I'm not just saying this because Autumn, who's a coach, is on the call, or maybe there are other coaches, but I've had other USDA grants and didn't even there's no coaches involved. And so when we got the CIFAR grant and we had this coach, I was like, what? It was just use them. It's so wonderful to have. It's not, I thought it would be more of someone like overseeing our work and, but in fact, I feel like it's like a colleague that we have who's like, we're meeting every month or working through stuff. And it's easy, like, especially in the pandemic, to kind of get myopic. I mean, we did for sure. And I felt like we weren't doing enough or whatever. And so I really, I encourage the new grantees and or future grantees, really take advantage of your coach. I mean, they make it easy because they fall in your lap. They're not going away, so which is good. But I wish more federal funding mechanisms, like even within the USDA, had the coach, and maybe they do now. I don't know, but we've really benefited from that.
Yeah, let me just echo praises for Autumn Gwynn, great coach. And one of the roles she plays for us anyway is to let us know that we're not alone, that all these other grantees are facing similar issues. Because I think sometimes you might feel like you're out on an island trying to figure out all these issues and you're the only ones failing, or you're the only ones struggling, or the only ones with these challenges. But it's comforting to know that COVID's hit everybody and everybody's just struggling. So she's been very helpful for us in keeping us inspired to keep going.
Yeah, I think I totally feel that. I get off the calls and I feel so encouraged. I'm like, thank you so much. But our coach too, Carrie, has done a really good job of connecting us with other sites, and it's really led to good conversations and maybe even future collaborations. But I mean, at least our coach is really good at like bringing things to closure and making that happen. And specifically in regards to connecting other grantees, that's so wonderful to be able to talk through ideas with other grantees.
I appreciate
I
that
would
so much,
agree.
y'all.
I would agree. Autumn has done a good job. And when we have our coaching calls, just the open conversation, you know, it's beneficial. So please use it. Please use it.
Well, and from the coach perspective, I become invested in each one of these projects, right? Because I hear the struggles that you're having, and I get to participate in some decision making every month and hopefully help. Sometimes I'm not sure that that's what I'm doing, but hopefully some of that comes across. But I also want to point up a little bit and say the folks at the center are awesome too. And so the evaluation staff there are really quick to answer questions. And they like it when you ask them questions. That's their job. They really like being in the midst and being able to have troubleshot, how do you say that word? A lot with Stephanie and Suzanne, and talking about, especially in the pandemic, and how the heck are we collecting this evaluation data? Because our university says we can't collect data in person anymore. And how am I supposed to match up participants if I can't have them doing these paper and pencil evaluations in person? And what does this look like? And so you have such an incredible group of people that are at UMN. And also Dr. Williams is really great at answering questions. And so being able to send her emails and have responsiveness from her and from the members of her team about those budget things that we as coaches are not allowed to answer, I think is really critical. And there's just like, I think I heard somebody describe this as plush technical assistance one year in one of our orientation meetings. And so, yeah, the SciFar program, there are other programs that are trying to do a little bit of what we're doing now. And it's been incredible. And before I was a coach, I had a coach. And so I appreciate that as well.
Thank you all. I'm going to end it on these really wonderful comments about PDTA Center, but especially about our coaching team. I know that they're really an asset, and their expertise is really wonderful. We're at time, and I don't want to hold people up for the next session, but thank you again, Autumn, Mark, Boyd, and Carolyn, for being part of our panel, and we really appreciate it. And I know if folks have additional questions, if you email scifarpdta@umn.edu, I'm happy to direct you to folks who can give you answers if you didn't have time to ask.